workshop owner in the Gulch for the people, and I offered myself to the world. I was a workshop owner. I was a workshop owner.
Hi, welcome back to White Fox Vintage Snowmobile. I'm Al Pinkney. Gonna just do a short video series on reconditioning a 440 Polaris free air TX engine and putting it into a 1978 TX chassis. If you recall from the previous WD-40 series, I sold the 250 TX engine out of the legally pink chassis and put it in the WD-40 oval sled. Well, that leaves us a perfectly good TX chassis without an engine, and I have lots of parts. So we're going to tinker with a couple of core engines and see if we have enough pieces to throw something together here. And this guy is Mr. Cool Looking Skidoo guy from the 70s. He's in my shop making me remember why I don't drive Skidoo. Ha! Thanks for watching. So here's our first donor engine. This is, it says EC44PT-04 on the bottom end. This is 1975 and earlier top end because there are no bridges in the exhaust intake ports. The current rules in Saskatchewan, I don't think I'd be allowed to run this engine in a later chassis, but I have a top end that would be legal, so we'll see what we end up with. So we'll tear into this old engine and see what we got. EC44PT-04 cylinder heads. That one looks like it's been bead blasted or new. That's a good sign. So I'm not sure what the difference between the 04 cylinder head and the 05, which is 05 engine is the 1976 and later. We'll have to see what the difference in the cylinders is, or the cylinder heads. As far as the cylinders themselves, these have the big exhaust ports in 70 and 75. I see we do have some chrome peeled off these cylinders, so these are probably not going to get used, but who knows. The cylinders are have a casting number a mile long. The other one is showing some rust, so I kind of think this one, yeah, this one's been sleeved, I think. These have a chrome bore. We definitely have one cylinder that's sleeved. The other one looks to be original, not nearly the magnetism. So we have one sleeved cylinder and one not sleeved. And a rather shitty looking bottom end. I do see some rust down here on the counterweights, like serious rust. But the thing is, this guy turns pretty good. But again, we'll evaluate it. I know the stub where the clutch goes on is pretty rusty. We'll take this apart and examine the bearings. This engine has the long studs to hold the cylinders. We're safe to flip this motor over without hitting the rods to take the bolts out. I guess first thing we should do is get the flywheel off, and I got a feeling it's not even tight. Yuck! So I'm not really sure. The timing looks to be advanced as far as it'll go in this engine. So this is a whole scary situation. It's very rusty. I don't know where this bottom end came from. I'm getting older, you know. So therefore I'm not going to mark where the stator's sitting with a punch or a chisel. I'm not going to bother. I don't think we're going too far with this. Ouch! Kind of rough. Most of the bolts in these bottom ends are 8mm in diameter, but the two on the PTO end are 10mm. Now something I just noticed, the bottom mounting boss for the recoil housing and the bottom of the block have been carefully machined off, obviously to fit in a chassis. Now I don't think I've seen that before. I don't know if the 75 chassis had clearance issues there. I'm not sure. So that's interesting. At first I thought it was broken off, but these have been put in a mill and machined off. So maybe this is an old race engine. I have a dead blow hammer. Actually doesn't look too bad. have it. Well, I'm not a crankshaft specialist, but it's just common sense. If these bearings sound rough or dry or ratchety, they should be replaced. And I am quite pleasantly surprised to note that these bearings all seem really good to me. The rod bearings, big end bearings, again are rusty, but the bearing surfaces themselves seem pretty good. I think we've at least got a crank, and it looks like we have a bottom end. So we taped up the rods and turn the lathe slow. We're going to have to be careful. This could really hurt. Now the worst part about it is I tried to tap the key out of the crank, but it is in there and I don't think I'll mess with it. So there's one end done. Should be reasonable. I'm fortunate in the fact that I've been collecting for a while, and lo and behold, in a box I've got a couple of good good to go 0.5 cylinders, and it does say 0.5 on these. The difference is they have a smaller, what I believe is a smaller exhaust port and a bridged intake port, a little more reliability. And they didn't rev as high. The 1975 engine was spec'd up over 8,000 RPM, and these are around the 7, I believe. So we got a couple nice cylinders. I don't know if the chrome is the greatest, but there's no chips or flakes, so we'll make it happen. So we've cleaned the crank cases and came out really nice. I'm almost wondering if these are new old stock. There's some marks on them, but they could be from rolling around on the shelf. And it's interesting, as early as 75, Fuji had the castings in place for oil injection shaft. I think that's cool. So anyway, we're going to lube the bearings really good on this crank before we set it in. I've got some new seals to put in. This is just 2-stroke oil. Give everybody a little startup drink. Like that. Now our seals, we'll put some grease in the lips. Or I do have assembly lube. So this is the world famous 1194 case sealer, also called Yamabond in some circles. I'll just put a fine smear on here. This tube is actually starting to get a little bit stiffened up, so I put it over all the surfaces because when you torque the case down, I can't help but think that layer of sealer, if it's not on all the surfaces, might cause a bit of a problem. Who knows? There. Now this particular crank has no locating pins on the bearings to keep them from rotating, so that's probably not a great thing. Just make sure the seals hit their grooves. we can find our bolts. So the bolts are all cleaned with the wrench grinder, clean threads off, and we give them, what I do is give them just a little drip of motor oil, each one. It makes for a little better torque experience. There. So we'll look up the torque spec and start tightening. So we'll start by just snugging the bolts up. There is a pattern, do the inner bolts and work your way outwards. So according to the Polaris manual, the 8mm bolts, which are the bulk of them, are 17 to 18 foot-pounds. And the 10mm bolts on the PTO end are 23 to 25. So we've got our little torque wrench set at 17. This is an inch-pound torque wrench, so you've got to make a conversion all the time. We'll just snug them up first. That's it for the 17 to 18, and then we'll get the half-inch torque drive out, torque wrench out for 14mm. Because the inch-pound torque wrench doesn't go up to 25 foot-pounds. And as always, we'll just make sure things are still turning freely. They're actually turning really nice. Pretty good confidence level in how this crank will behave anyway. Unless it's out of phase or out of rollout, who knows.